An old rivalry is rekindled this weekend as West Virginia hosts Virginia Tech. We're talking with Tim Sullivan of HockeyHaven.com on what to expect in Saturday's game. Then, we're breaking down how we see the game shaking out for the Mountaineers. For Keenan Cummings, I'm Jared Sari, and welcome to Musings from the Mountains. Joining us to talk Virginia Tech ahead of this weekend's game is Tim Sullivan. He's the editor of Hokie Haven on the Rivals Network. Tim, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. How are you guys doing?
Doing all right. Can't complain. Keenan, everything good over there?
Yeah, everything's good in sunny Reedsville.
There you go. Now, Virginia Tech is entering this week having won the first two of the season, including a ranked North Carolina team. Tim, what can we expect from the Hokies in their first road test of the season?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see because, like you mentioned, they haven't played on the road yet. And this is a team that, for obvious reasons, has not played a true road game in over almost 2 years now, I guess, at this point. So that's something that there's a lot of young talent that has not had the chance to experience. And I think when you look at the first two games that they've played this year, they've really actually leaned upon that home crowd, especially against North Carolina. It was, a Friday evening game. They had a chance to tailgate a little bit and get behind their team a little bit more. So the Hokies really relied upon that, and I think it led them to play a really good defensive game, especially. And when the timing was not quite the same, they played a little bit earlier in the day against Middle Tennessee last week. I feel like the defense didn't quite have that crowd to feed off of. So it'll be really interesting to see, especially in what has historically been a rivalry game. Obviously, these teams don't see each other nearly as often anymore, but it'll be interesting to see how they handle that hostile road crowd, because I think that's going to be something that is pretty new to the vast majority of guys who are going to be contributors for this team.
And it sounds strange to me as someone that's been kind of just grew up with this series, to hear that, it's crazy. Even younger fans here at West Virginia, some of them don't necessarily look at this as a rivalry game. And I know it's probably the same where you're at in Blacksburg. What's that like? I mean, how are people treating this game? I'm sure some of the old faithful understand the importance and how significant this game is, at least in terms of history. But what's the buzz like over there? And I know from the players' perspective, they probably have no idea, what this game meant without being educated.
Yeah, it's interesting. Justin Fuente mentioned earlier this week that he's relying on guys who are on the current Hokie staff, who are former Hokie players in the Big East days, that kind of have a little bit more of a knowledge of what this rivalry was like when it was an every year deal. And what I thought was really funny is one of the players on the team, Nick Gallo, he's a tight end. His older brother Eric played for the Hokies just a few years ago and said, "Oh yeah, I remember last time these teams played. I was a junior recruit in high school." I was like, "Man, that makes it feel so weird that that's the last time that these guys played." As one of the upperclassmen leaders was still committed to Virginia Tech and not even yet officially a Hokie yet. So it is something that has to be taught to them. It's not something that they just feel from the every year, whether that's watching it on TV or some of the older guys having played in it before, because very few guys on this team have played in this rivalry before. So I do think it's something that the program is trying to emphasize to the coaches, to the players, exactly how important it really is, because it's something that they don't necessarily just feel. But I do think that there is an effort to say, hey, this is not just a cross-sectional, Big 12 versus ACC game. This is something that means a little bit more to people who have been around this program and to people who have been rooting for this program for a long time.
How about the fan base, Tim? What's their feelings of this game? Would they like to see it happen more frequently? Obviously, future conference realignment, who knows what will happen down the road? But is that something that the Virginia Tech fan base as a whole would like to see, or is it kind of hard to connect with some of them? Because obviously, as I mentioned, some of the younger fans don't really look at this as a rivalry.
Yeah, I think a lot of the fans are kind of, whether they are older fans or younger fans, a lot of Virginia Tech fans come from VT families. So they really feel it. They feel like it's a really, really nasty rivalry at times, which obviously there are some people who like a nasty rivalry and would like to see it more often. There are some who kind of say, we don't like visiting Morgantown. We're not going this weekend, and we don't want to go pretty much ever. So it's kind of interesting to see. It kind of depends on the split of how people feel about the nastiness of it. I was pretty surprised because, as somebody who didn't who didn't start covering Virginia Tech until this rivalry had started fading away a little bit. It's something that I kind of felt like, yeah, maybe, a few years of distance will maybe make that heart grow fonder a little bit, and it'll be a bit more of potentially a friendly rivalry. But the Hokie fans don't necessarily see it that way, and so it'll be pretty interesting to see exactly, depending on the outcome, whether they're just totally despondent or whether they're over the moon, or if they just kind of say, okay, took care of business against a team that we feel like we should beat. I'm happy that it was a rivalry game, but we'll see what happens going forward.
Now, looking ahead to this weekend, tight end James Mitchell out for the Hokies. When we spoke with West Virginia D coordinator Jordan Leslie on Tuesday of this week, he said, basically, hey, it's a big loss for him, but it's really not that big because of the depth they have at that position. How do you see it? Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, I understand why that would be the take of somebody from the West Virginia side of things. And I think the Virginia Tech side of things has really tried to downplay how big of a loss he is from an on-field perspective. All this week, the talk has been, this is just the best kid. And truly James Mitchell is one of the best, upstanding young men on the Hokies team. But from an on-field perspective, they've tried to say, okay, we've got other guys in there, and they do, but there isn't one player who can do everything that Mitchell can do. He's a guy that they give the ball to out of the backfield a little bit. He can obviously get downfield and catch passes, which is his primary skill set, but he can also block a little bit. And there isn't a tight end on this roster who can do all three of those things. I think kind of the tight end carries are going to go out of the playbook for sure, but you're going to have Gallo, who I previously mentioned, as a bit more of a blocking type tight end who's going to have to extend his skill set into the passing sort of things. And kind of opposite with Drake DeUlius, who's a kid who's really had a really bad injury luck over the course of his career at Virginia Tech, but he's basically a glorified wide receiver who's kind of learning how to block a little bit. So yes, between the two of them, you can replace what Mitchell brought to this team, but you can't do it in one body. And that's something that's going to take some adjusting for the Hokies, because they really have relied upon him, not only to stretch the middle of the field and not only to be a factor in the running game, but to do all of that at the same time. And that's what they won't be able to do anymore.
Now, through the last 2 weeks, we've seen quarterback Braxton Burmeister. He's a hell of an athlete, big arm. He can move his feet. What do you expect from him this Saturday, especially with Mitchell being sidelined for the first time this year?
Yeah, getting rid of that security blanket is going to be tough for him, because Burmeister is a guy who, like you mentioned, has all the physical tools, but the confidence in himself to execute the full range of the passing game is not always there. And when you lose one of your best wide receivers, or I guess one of your best pass catchers, I should say, since Mitchell is truly a tight end, when you lose one of your best pass catchers and one of the guys who's going to be right over the middle, that confidence takes another hit. Burmeister is a guy who I think the staff would prefer to do a little bit more of everything, but right now they're most comfortable with him executing run options and fakes off of that to execute the passing game. And if they go deep, it's going to be a pure deep bomb, where it's kind of one of those, either it's incomplete or we make a big play sort of things. They're not having him, run those deep outs that are kind of the tougher throws, not because he doesn't have the arm to do it, because he does, but the confidence to execute on time is going to be difficult for him, probably through the first half of this year, until he continues to get more comfortable. And it's going to be, I think the biggest thing that they want to do is make him comfortable by using his legs, because that's what he feels really good doing. That's what he did a lot of last year. And as quickly as the passing game can come around, it's going to be a little bit slower because he doesn't have Mitchell anymore. That's another one of those talented pass catchers that he just isn't going to have the option to get to. But it's going to be a work in progress. And I would say the Middle Tennessee game was maybe a step back for his confidence in the passing game, but we'll see if he's able to step it up for a big game, because he's had a little bit of a reputation for doing that in the past as well. And I think even though he's a kid who comes from California, played his first couple of years at Oregon, he's from a Virginia family and understands maybe a little bit more of the history than even some of his teammates who have been at VT for 5 years might get a little bit too.
Needless to say, you kind of addressed this, but this team is going to have to run the football if they want to win this game, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll be interesting to see how they do that. Obviously, Burmeister's legs are a big piece of it, but they lost a couple of key offensive linemen in the offseason. One of them transferred to a place that you guys are probably pretty familiar with, and another one transferred to Marshall. So I think that without those two offensive linemen and without running back Khalil Herbert, who's now with the Bears, they really do need to kind of find the right chemistry. The offense has not been clicking quite yet this season. It's been okay, but it has not been clicking quite yet. And a big part of that is kind of adjusting to life without Doug Nestor and, Khalil Herbert and Brian Hudson, the three big guys that are really important to them. So we'll see what happens.
Tim, when you look at this defense, Virginia Tech's obviously been known for their defense for a long time. What is the strength of this unit? What do they do well? Obviously, from what I've seen, the pass rush, it lives up to the reputation.
Yeah, the big thing is they're now able to cover. This was like one of the worst secondaries in the country last year, for a lot of reasons that were kind of out of anybody's control. They dealt with a ton of injuries. Cornerback Caleb Farley opted out before the season, and I think in hindsight, very obviously made the correct decision. Jermaine Waller, who's their number one cornerback right now, and a huge piece. He's gonna pick off some passes if they're put in his direction on Saturday. So if he had been healthy last year, it might have been a different story. But now that they have the coverage piece back, the pass rush that you mentioned is able to find home so much more consistently. And that's something that, because they were unable to cover last year, even a pretty good pass rush didn't really get the accolades it might have deserved because the quarterbacks were able to get the ball out to open receivers. So I think when you look at the strength of the team, it really is in the pass rush, but it has to be augmented by that secondary. And we'll see if the Hokies can continue to stay healthy, because that was obviously the issue last year. And if they do, I think the pass rush is going to be really the beneficiary of a stronger secondary.
Have you had a lot of your questions answered on defense so far, or are there still some concerns, that this Hokies unit might have?
Yeah, there are still a few. I think depth at the safety positions, unfortunately, over the past couple of weeks, they've had to see it just because of maybe 1 week injuries to a guy like Keontae Jenkins, who started most of the season as a true freshman last year and got hurt against North Carolina. Devin Hunter is a kid who's the highest ranked recruit on this roster, but has been unable to make it click. And then last year was dealing with a legal situation. Got it cleared up this winter. He pleaded guilty to a lesser offense than the one he was charged with, and is back with the team. But when you have kind of multiple guys that have question marks at the safety position, you're never quite sure exactly how that you can rely on them. And when they haven't had 100% top line safety guys available, it hasn't always gone well. And that's, for the Hokies, that's even more of an impact actually in run defense, because they bring those safeties into the box a lot to cover the run. It doesn't necessarily affect them quite as much in the passing game, fortunately, because the cornerbacks are able to cover pretty well. Obviously, against a spread team like West Virginia, the safeties are going to be so much more important than they might have been against North Carolina or Middle Tennessee State, that have either slightly less spread out offenses or slightly less top end talent. So we'll see if that safety depth can really come through this weekend.
Now, West Virginia has shown through the first 2 weeks that right tackle, left tackle, those positions have struggled mightily. A guy like Amari Barno, is he a kind of guy on that defensive line that can just from the first snap just kind of take over the game?
Yeah, if that secondary can prevent the quarterback from getting the ball out immediately, Barno's going to have a field day. He did against North Carolina. Middle Tennessee State noticed that and put 2 and 3 guys on him on every snap. And instead of Barno getting the production, his teammates got a number of sacks and pressures. So it really is a team effort. But Barno is the guy who, if there's one guy to focus on and say he's going to be the one to either get the sacks himself or change the game because of kind of the gravity he has, he's going to be the one to do it. And that can be an issue for a team with questionable tackles for sure.
Is there a guy on defense who, in your eyes, what you see, he's not spoken about as much? He's very under the radar. Is there a guy on that defense for you?
Yeah, I have a hard time saying it because he's the reigning ACC defensive back of the week, but Shamari Connor is kind of their hybrid safety linebacker, they call it, the whip linebacker in the Bud Foster offense or defense. That's not what they call it anymore. But he's a guy who isn't quite a linebacker and isn't quite a safety, and therefore never really gets the credit at either of those positions that he truly deserves. But I think he's a guy who's one of the best defenders in the country. He gets out, covers guys out of the box, makes plays in the run game, can blitz and get sacks. He's a reigning ACC position player of the week holder right now. But despite that, I still think that he's somebody that doesn't get the credit that he deserves.
You mentioned that this is obviously, their first road trip this year and first one in a while. How important do you think it is for this team to get off to a good start on the road? And what's going to be I'll go a spoiler alert, a very hostile crowd, very excited crowd. How important do you think that is, or is that more just kind of pregame fluff?
I don't necessarily know, like you mentioned, we don't have a feeling quite yet of how they're going to play on the road, but what we've seen over the last couple of years is actually if they struggle early, this team seems to band together and play a bit stronger of a game than maybe I was expecting out of them at least. And I think probably, they play better over the next 3 quarters than maybe Vegas might have expected out of them if they get off to a bad start. So I don't think they're the sort of team that kind of gets broken psychologically by a bad start. Of course, all of last year, they didn't see a truly hostile crowd because they were playing in front of, 1 in 2,000 people. I'm certain there are going to be many more people than that in Morgantown this weekend. So we'll see how that affects them. And I think, in the big picture, it feels like that the crowd will be a little bit of a game changer there, but really it might just be more of an equalizer that says if they start poorly, they can't quite recover, but they aren't going to be the sort of team that starts poorly and then just says, okay, we're throwing in the towel here.
What are your keys to this one? Basically, like, finish this sentence. What Virginia Tech wins this game if blank, or West Virginia wins this game if blank.
For the Hokies, it's definitely if Braxton Burmeister has an efficient game, that means no turnovers, no airmailing, the occasional deep ball that he takes. That's the biggest thing, because I think the run game is never going to be awesome, but it's always going to be pretty good. And if Burmeister adds his legs to that, it can be quite good. But they need to move the ball through the air to have success offensively. I think the defense is going to have a solid game no matter what. And the one question mark there would be, and I guess this is, if blank goes well for West Virginia, is if the Hokies can't handle the slot receiver, because that's something that, like I mentioned, with the safety depth that they are trying to develop, it can be a question mark how good of a coverage player you're going to be able to split over a guy like that. And if it's somebody that can't, carry that route deep, it's going to be an issue for the defense. But I think on the whole, when you look at this Virginia Tech team, it's a bit more of a classic VT team, strong defense, maybe a slightly questionable offense because a quarterback can't quite execute the passing game. This is the sort of Virginia Tech team that West Virginia fans might remember from the days of yore, in fact. But yeah, I do think it's kind of those situations where it's really going to come down to, I guess, the passing game on either side of the ball.
What's your prediction for this one?
I think the Hokies have enough to get the job done. I think it's going to be a really close game. I don't see either team really pulling away with it, even though, as you guys know, for sure, that an air raid team that gets ahead can really turn the screws on some people. But I do think that the Hokies defense is strong enough to keep them in it, even if the offense isn't playing well. And of course, both teams have the opportunity to make incredible plays on special teams. So I think it will stay pretty close as they trade blows a little bit. I think it'll not be as high scoring a game as some people might think, but I think something in the low 20s with the Hokies taking, I don't know, maybe a 24-21 type of result where they can just squeak one out on the road.
For more insight on the Hokies, check him out on Twitter at SULLIVTI or at HokieHaven.com. Tim Sullivan, again, thank you so much for joining us, and let's have a good game this weekend.
Yep. Thanks for having me, guys.
Virginia Tech Week is finally here. Keenan, what do you expect from Mountaineers coming off of that 66-0 win to Long Island?
Well, I don't think it's going to be that easy. This is obviously a big, big game for West Virginia and a big, big game for Neil Brown. I think you could tell, just from the starting of this thing, even last week, in the Long Island press conference, Didn't really beat around the bush. He said it's one of the biggest games in his tenure. I think it's unquestionably the biggest game of his tenure, and he knows it. I think the team knows it. Um, you can feel it in the fan base. This is a monumental game. I don't do this typically. I'm not this type of guy. I don't put a lot on one game, but this is a game West Virginia needs to find a way to win, and it's not going to be easy. This is a ranked Tech team. There's a lot of history here, although most of that history of recent is dormant. They have not only played one time since 2005. They've played probably 50 times, over 50 times. So I think it's going to be an interesting game. When I look at this on paper, Jared, to me, I think the matchups to watch, especially for West Virginia, is, I guess, not necessarily a matchup, but a player, Jared Dagey. How is he going to respond? Yes, he bounced back incredibly against Long Island, but you expected that. And also, they didn't pressure him. I mean, he had a clean pocket most of the game. Dagey has struggled in his career when teams have been able to generate pressure, which obviously Virginia Tech can do that. They're going to be in the backfield. They're going to create pressure. West Virginia's offensive line is going to have a tough task kind of corralling them, because I'd say that's probably one of the strengths of their football team. And two, kind of go hand in hand with that. How effectively can this West Virginia team run the football? Those are two things that I'm really looking at when it comes to the West Virginia offense against the Virginia Tech defense. Anything standing out to you on that front?
I wanted to take what you said about Dagey and kind of run with that, because I think, we saw the reaction from fans last week. Garrett Green comes in, looks pretty all right. He passes the eye test, I would say, but Coach Brown did say that he went off script a lot of times, so there's still some some haze in the quarterback room. But if we continue to see this average Jarrett Dagey against top tier opponents, I think this weekend, if we keep seeing that Dagey, it's going to look even worse going up against a quarterback like Braxton Burmeister, who potentially is one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the nation. Helped lead the Hokies to a win over North Carolina week 1, a ranked Tar Heel team week 1. If Dagey keeps performing the way he has been, I think, and Braxton Burmeister performs the way everyone expects him to, if West Virginia doesn't win this one, it's going to be one of those probably stay off Twitter days, I would say.
You mentioned Burmeister, and I think that the interesting parallel with him is he's very similar to Garrett Green, the way he plays. He runs the ball, not necessarily known for as a big time thrower, a guy that's going to run the ball, can move the pocket. And, if Virginia Tech comes into Morgantown and beats West Virginia with a guy like that, and you have a guy like that on the bench, granted, I know it's a different scenario. One's a redshirt freshman, the other is a redshirt junior. But a guy similar to him, and you don't play Garrett Green at any point in this game, struggles, that is how to get a fan base riled up. And that's what I mean when I kick back to what I was saying about the importance of this game. I mean, you look at it on paper, Jared. 2-1 heading to Oklahoma looks a hell of a lot better than 1-2 heading to Oklahoma.
Especially if one of those wins is against number 15 team in the country.
Well, really, at this point, you can throw the rankings out the window. I mean, who knows how good North Carolina was? I mean, let's be honest. Who knows how good this Virginia Tech team is? But even more important than that, it's going to count no matter what. It's like last year when West Virginia beat Kansas State. They clearly weren't a ranked football team, but at the time they were when they played them. The thing that's going to really matter, though, is West Virginia fans are starving for a big win. And I'm not trying to downplay what Neil Brown's done, because he's had success. I mean, that's absolutely clear. Winning the bowl game last year was a big game. Some of the ranked teams they've knocked off. I think they've knocked off 2 since he's been here. A couple wins that they've put together. Obviously, TCU on the road in his first year. None of that would compare to beating Virginia Tech. And I don't care if this Virginia Tech team if they go 2-10 the rest of the year. Doesn't matter. Sometimes you have to appease the fan base. You got to please the crowd, so to speak. And you weren't able to do that against Maryland. Getting this type of win would be monumental for Neil Brown, not only for this season, not only, as I mentioned, going to Oklahoma, which is never fun for West Virginia, but for the trajectory of the program. You talk about trust the climb. You talk about, building stuff. At some point, you have to tangibly show people you're doing it. And this is not. And I feel like this is kind of one of those put up or shut up games. You have this game at home. First time you've played them in a long time, and it's there for the taking.
100% with you on that one. There is, you've touched on this a couple of times. I think we mentioned this last week. There is not a bigger game in Neil Brown's West Virginia career than this one on Saturday. And even if West Virginia were to lose this game and win out the rest of the season, beat Oklahoma, beat Iowa State, it'd still be a sour taste in fans' mouths. 100%. You can't refute that. So it'll be really interesting to see how this game plays out. Is there anything else you want to touch on, or do you want to go ahead and jump into predictions?
I think we should at least talk about a little bit about how West Virginia's defense stacks up against Virginia Tech. Yeah, we mentioned Burmeister, what he's able to do. This is a team that lost one of the versatile playmaker in Mitchell at the tight end spot. Used him in a lot of different ways. I think it'll be interesting to see how they respond and how West Virginia is able to defend them. West Virginia looked up and down. I guess if you could throw out the first quarter against Maryland, the defenses look pretty good. It's not where Jordan Leslie wants it to be. It's not really where West Virginia needs to be by the end of the year. It's not last year's unit. But you see a lot of signs, a lot of things that have looked good to this point. So how do they defend them? Virginia Tech's been able to move the football effectively. They've done it completely different ways in the first two games. So it'll be very interesting to see how West Virginia matches up there. And tackling, obviously, is going to be important, especially when the quarterback gets out. If he's able to get out, you got to be able to get him to the ground because, unlike your typical quarterback, he's got some wheels.
Yeah, matchup problems. Just looking up and down this Virginia Tech roster, they've got a lot of playmakers, a lot of high-profile talent. James Mitchell being out does hurt them, but as Jordan Leslie had alluded to, they're so deep at tight end, it almost really doesn't even matter. Of course, that's probably a future NFL draft day one guy, but this will be an interesting one. Lot of talent Virginia Tech has. I don't think West Virginia has the talent to match. It's just part of trusting the climb, I guess. But Keenan, are you trusting the climb this Saturday? Break it down for us. What do you expect?
I think this is going to be a close game. I think West Virginia getting this game at home matters. Obviously, Vegas agrees. I think that always matters too. I see this being a very back and forth game. I don't see either team, necessarily pummeling the other. The only way that happens is one of these teams sloppy like West Virginia did at Maryland. If you turn the ball over 4 or 5 times, it's probably not going to be close. But I see this as a game that's going to be back and forth. In the end, I've talked about it already several times here. I think West Virginia's got their backs against the wall in a sense. Neil Brown understands how important this game is. I think they're going to find a way to get it done pretty late in the game. I think this game's going to the fourth quarter.
Could you put a score on it? You did say a close one, but the numbers. People care about the numbers.
27-24.
I think that's respectable. I couldn't disagree with you more. I do think Virginia Tech will pull this one out. I haven't seen much of anything that makes me confident in this West Virginia team. I'm sure the fans on the blue lot will love that. Will love to hear that. They'll probably drag me for it, but Alonzo Adai has been underperforming. Letty Brown has been underperforming. Those are your top two guys on both sides of the field. And it's not going to help when you go up against this Virginia Tech team. I don't think I could totally see a 2-touchdown loss, 28-14, 31-17, something along those lines. But I do think West Virginia will not pull this one out. I think they'll be 1-2 heading into Oklahoma. Sour taste in fans' mouths, but so be it.
Going against Vegas, huh? Bold take.
Yeah, I will go against Vegas 100%. It's I don't even know. I'd like to say more. I've got nothing else on this West Virginia team. It's very hard for me to.
I think you're where most people are at, Jared. You're kind of at the you got to see it to believe it phase.
Yeah,
which I think is fair. I think it's fair. I think West Virginia's offensive line has to play better in this game. The 2 points I mentioned on offense absolutely have to happen. If they don't, it's possible that West Virginia crumbles here. But I do think this team has resiliency. People look at that Maryland game. 4 turnovers was the difference. They lost by 6 points. So I think that for as bad as they played in that game, and I understand Virginia Tech's a much better defense, but I would argue Maryland's probably better offensively than they are. So we'll see how it turns out, but it should be fun. It's a sold-out game, noon o'clock, high noon. So a gold rush. There'll be a lot of fans in attendance. It'll be really exciting. We'll be here to break it down as well after the fact and give you some of our insight on what unfolded. Hopefully, for the Blue Lot's sake, and it's not burning to the ground, West Virginia is able to at least, at worst, make this a highly competitive game. Otherwise, that place is not going to be fun.
Yeah, all we can do this right now is speculate, but hopefully it's going to be a fun game. I know this will be my first West Virginia Tech game, albeit they haven't been in the same conference together since I was still in probably diapers, but I'm looking forward to being there. I'm looking forward to watching it. I'm looking forward to breaking it down for all you listeners on the Blue Lot and on the website after the game. Don't forget to follow at Rivals Keenan and at Jared Sari on Twitter for game day updates. We'll have some content going up after the game, the days following on our website, westvirginia.rivals.com or WVSports.com. But until next time, this has been Musings from the Mountains, and thanks for listening.